So, this video is a little different. I figured I would showcase the Luna Ridge log runs on the channel, but since everyone I play with has done them a million times, there's not much to say about the runs anymore that we find important enough to comment on. But I still want to showcase them. After all, they're a pretty important part of the map, so why not use the runs as background footage for something else? For instance, why not use it here while I'm reading a story aloud? Well, of course, that's what we're here for today. I wrote the story, and it's only a small excerpt of it, but I hope you enjoy. No Home for a Hero. Chapter 1. The village bell rang out across the countryside. Mid-morn was upon the land. The farmers were hard at work in the fields, the fishermen were off to the riverside for today's catch, and the priests, well, their studies and prayers were interrupted for whatever reason had been brought about for them to ring the bell. The world was already awake. The bell was just a reminder of what time of day it was. For some, however, it was more than a small reminder. It was a wake-up call. Annie shot out of bed, adrenaline coursing through her veins. Rushing to get on her robes, she accidentally stubbed her toe in the corner of her bed. That wouldn't stop her from her one goal, however, as she pushed through the pain and continued readying herself as fast as her body could move. One simple thought bounced around in her skull. I'm late. Before stumbling out the door of her room, Annie stopped to make sure she had all her notes and charms gathered. There would be no time for breakfast, as her finals had already begun, but forgetting something as basic as her training medallion would prove catastrophic. Nutrition could wait, but a spark mage must have their tools prepared for the challenges ahead of them, and if Annabelle was going to be late, she was at least going to be well prepared. Most students were only there for mundane reasons. Some wanted the basic survival techniques with enhanced flair. Some wanted skills to make their long days on the fields easier to manage. Some wanted party tricks to knock the socks off of their friends. Others, like the Darcy boys, were there as a punishment for their misdeeds. Annie, on the other hand, chose to go in order to live up to her mother's legacy. Medallion? Check. Diluted vials of siren tears? Check. Notes on fulminology? Check. After making sure everything was where it needed to be, Annie made a mad dash down the stairs and out the door. Or, at least she would have, if something hadn't hit her in the middle of the kitchen. Not some magical epiphany or anything, just a frying pan. Right in the gut. As she curled up in pain from the crash and subsequent fall, her mother merely stood in shock, not sure what to think of the chaos in her kitchen, nor the scrambled eggs and daughter on the floor before her. After a few seconds of painful groans from Annie, her mother spoke. Annabelle, it's the solstice. Classes aren't happening. At a first glance, her mother would seem like no one special. Just another face in the ocean of faces. Only when you knew her name, Evelyn Cross Garner, would you understand her importance. Children's books and historical texts may play up the glory of the war hero, but it's undeniable that her wit and foresight helped the Coalition win the war against the seemingly unstoppable regime so many years ago. Now hundreds of years old, at least that's what she'd like you to believe, Evelyn's life has taken a calmer turn in retirement and in the upbringing of her own children. Annie took in a deep breath, the stranglehold of stress letting loose its grip as her mother's reminder set in. Right. No finals. Right. It's going to be quite the party today. Aren't you excited? Evelyn picked up the pan and wiped it down before wandering over to the stove. I hear Pastor Davis is going to prepare that currant pear streusel you like so much. Annie lay on her back, clutching her hands to her stomach. That's nice. Evelyn gave her a concerned glance. Aren't you excited? Mom, I just took a pan to the gut. Give me a bit. That wasn't intentional, I'll have you know. Annie chuckled. You sure? Of course. I would have aimed for the face, her mother said with a hint of sarcasm. I don't think I need another broken nose, Mom. At that remark, her mother started laughing uncontrollably, and Annie joined in soon after. The scars of our pasts make for good comedy in our present, and the two of them remembered the time that a younger Annabelle ran face first into the barn doors, expecting them to magically open on their own. But sometimes the tragedies of our past will live on forever. Evelyn never moved on from hers. Annabelle's middle name, Hazelwood, kept a simple homage to her lost sister. Evelyn's heroism didn't come from natural leadership. It didn't come from love for the common folk. It didn't come from raw power. It came from a sheer, undying want to find her sister and ensure her safety. A wish which would never come true. Say, what was that for, anyways? Annie stopped chewing to ask her mother a question. The bell. She took another large bite out of her breakfast. Evelyn stopped to think. If not for both her ring or holodeath, Annie said through a mouthful of scrambled eggs. What? Her mother inquired. Annie swallowed her food. It's not supposed to ring on holidays. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. Her mother paused. Well, now that you're up, why don't you go down and find out for yourself? Well, always good to get some exercise, you know. I already got some when running down the stairs, Mom. Sure, but that was cut short, wasn't it? Evelyn laughed. Annie took another bite of her food, and once she was done, spoke up again. Fine, I'll check it out. Oh, and while you're out and about, would you be a dear and give me some orange juice from Jovi? I hear her plantation is ripe. Sure thing, Mom. Hazelwood, her middle name, was a constant reminder of why Annabelle wanted to live up to her mother's legacy. It wasn't to find Hazel. It had been years since she was last seen, and she was most likely dead, if not worse, by this point. Instead, it was to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Evelyn failed to save her sister. There was no way to go back and fix that mistake. But Annie would make sure another one just like it wouldn't happen on her watch. With her newly acquired skills and talents, the aspiring spark mage could protect the innocent, standing tall where her mother stood once before. Well, once classes were finished tomorrow, that is. Finals were just around the corner, after all. The heart of the town was busier than usual for a holiday. The commotion could be heard from quite a distance away. Whatever had brought the village together had also stirred them to unrest. The streets were eerily barren, yet the roar of the crowd made it feel like the place was ablaze. Trudging cautiously down the empty paths, Annie made her way towards the church at the center of town, where everyone had likely gathered. Turning yet another corner, her assumption was right. The crowd came into view, all piled in the large courtyard before the steeple. It didn't seem violent, but the harsh glares from everyone's faces as they yelled endlessly at one another made it clear that something wasn't right. At the edge stood some people smart enough not to get involved. The Darcy boys leaned against the wall while laughing at the craze. Elder Alma was knitting away in her rocking chair from the second-floor balcony of her apartment, and Professor Maxwell sat on a bench a good distance away from the commotion. "Professor?" Annie asked, the wave of noise being far enough that she didn't need to raise her voice. The professor spun his head around. "Oh, hello, Annabelle." "Professor, you can just call me Annie." "And you can call me Max, Annabelle." The professor smiled and laughed. "I see you've got some fashion sense," he said, eyeing her training robes. I... Yes, I do. I thought today was finals. Annabelle slumped down in mild defeat and embarrassment. Aha! No, that's tomorrow. Annie rolled her eyes. Trust me, I know that now. Well, considering what kind of a riot might turn up here, Professor Maxwell gestured towards the crowd in front of them mid-sentence, maybe you can put what you've learned to good use. I don't think I have the right tools to call lightning right now, Professor. Of course not, that would be overkill. And it would be very unlike you not to have that at the ready. The professor burst into a hearty fit of laughter. Ah, Annabelle, you know me all too well. So, Professor... The professor cut her off. Please, Annabelle, just Max. Max, what's going on here? I'm honestly unsure. The king sent out a surveyor, I think? He turned to glance back at the crowd, a stumped frown taking form on his face. I'm unsure why the crowd got so riled up by a story, nor why that's what the survey was for to begin with. A story? Annie asked, puzzled. Yes. He paused for a second, collecting his thoughts. The surveyor said something about protecting our civilization's culture in case we all get wiped out from a war. Seriously? Yes, Annie, there is that war in the East, you know. But those are naval battles, Annie responded frantically in confusion, and they're thousands of miles away. Well, I guess someone made a compelling argument to get this done, then. Our king is a wuss, Annie said, rolling her eyes. This wasn't the first weird decision he'd made while in power, and it probably wouldn't be the last, either. Whatever the case, I'm sure, Maxwell was suddenly cut off by one loud, clear, booming voice that outdid the entire crowd. Would you please shut up for half a second? The crowd fell silent. Annie took this moment of clarity to rush her way towards the front of it all to try and see who was talking. It wasn't any voice she recognized, that's for sure. It was likely the surveyor, but anyone with the power to bring order to a chaotic gathering was a leader, and leaders were often heroes. And if this was a hero, maybe this was one who fought alongside her mother in the storybooks. I am sick and tired of these stupid arguments. Who cares about the condiments the dragon used to fry the frog? That's not the point of the story to begin with. Pushing her way to the front of the crowd was anything but an easy task. Annie struggled to find a path through the densely packed horde. Who could it be? Peeking over the heads of the swarm of people, she couldn't make out any faces. A person from the crowd chimed in. Well, what else do you want? It's in the name of the tale, the dragon and the frog. After finding a small gap and making a good dash forwards, Annie misjudged the ability to stop her own momentum, crashing into the backside of someone who shuffled into her path at just the wrong time. The surveyor spoke again. It's about the frog's ignorance to the simple fact that he's a frog. The taste of the cooked frog is irrelevant. Apologizing quickly and getting back up to her feet, Annie continued her weaving through the crowd as thoughts weaved through her head. Was it Sir Daniel, Commander Eltwood, Prince Balst? Could she maybe learn how to be a hero by traveling abroad by the side of one of these classic protectors? You think it's irrelevant, the woman in the crowd retorted. Our culture values the taste and flavors of plenty of ingredients. It does not matter if it is a local tradition. You are here to record everything you can, and this matters as much as everything else. Finally, after a crazy scramble to reach the front, Annie had made it to be greeted by anything but who she expected. It shouldn't have come as much of a surprise, but her hopes had been brought up Another was shot down as she looked at the man across the way who was addressing the lady. The surveyor's garb was unique. A Stetson sat atop his head, and the tattered jacket that lay across his torso looked like it would have perfectly suited an inventor. Strapped to his back was a sword unlike any she'd seen before, one that curved along its blade, carrying a hilt with no guard. A satchel rested against his hip, and he held a book open in his hand. "Miss, I've a very strict deadline to meet, and I don't want to waste it with the likes of this town and its petty arguments." The man spun around, his brow furrowed, channeling the anger of a lesser god, and his teeth were gritted as if he were, well, arguing with a stubborn peasant over the ownership of a single penny. "Oh, really now?" The woman stomped to the ground in rage. "Is it really so tight that you cannot listen to something as simple as the seasoning of a frog?" The surveyor closed his eyes for a second, let out a hefty sigh, closed his book, and turned to face her dead on with the glare to kill. "Look, miss, yes." On that note, the sky split in half. The air turned to dust. Every color died, draining from all as a massive rift tore itself through reality behind the surveyor. Like arms of the starved reaching for a loaf of bread, the rift struck the ground with immense force. Yes, my schedule is that tight. The dirt and cobble was torn through like molten butter to a chainsaw, the fabric of reality pouring up in an inverted waterfall. The crowd's shock turned to horror, their horror to panic. Some ran as fast as they could, others couldn't dare move a muscle, frozen in place by fear. The screams returned, but this time as a frenzied cry for help, rather than a heated debate. In the panic, though, Annie tried to hold her ground and calm herself as she prepared to defend the town however she could. This was her shot. But the roar of the crowd and bodies pushing their way past made it impossible to focus as she kept rebalancing herself in the tide of people. It didn't matter either way. The scream slowly died as the air turned to dust, the dust to stone, the stone to nothing, and the nothing to a crushing end. Yet, despite the world dissolving around them, and the darkness encompassing everything to a point that it was impossible to see even a meter before you, the surveyor took these last few moments to utter a simple phrase. "Farewell, dumbasses." He saluted, and all lost meaning. Ringing. It was all she could hear, all she could think, all she could see. There was nothing but ringing, and it was everywhere, it was everyone, it was everything, ringing, 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 until suddenly, it wasn't. Her eyes were wide open. Not out of choice, Annie couldn't move a muscle no matter how hard she tried. The ringing faded to a mild distraction, nagging her ears like a needy fly. Her thoughts returned, and she could see the world again. Though lacking color, the saturation had been drained, all but for a dim green glow on some of the people closest to her. The bustle of the crowd had been drowned into an eerie silence. All movement was frozen. All she could do was stare dead on at the rift in the world before her, as its still image burned into her brain. Well, the mostly still image. With a heavy sigh, the surveyor stretched out his arms and back. Blue eyes. He blinked a few times and let out a loud groan as he stretched again. Brushing his shoulders, his jacket froze in place the moment he took his hand off it. "You know, I'm never gonna get used to this." After a small pause and some more stretching, his glare turned straight to Annabelle. The small amounts of green turned blue as he approached, his eyes piercing her heart with a deadpan stare. He grabbed her shoulder. She could feel it. She could feel everything. The force of 1,000 stars and the power of the tide was burning through her flesh, bone, muscle, and body, as though a talon had pierced her heart. She couldn't scream, but if the chance was ever given to her in that moment, she could have shattered all the world's glass. "Yeah, you'll do," said the surveyor, letting loose his grip. She began to fall. The world rose around her. The crushing pain only worsened, and she could feel her lungs collapsing. She fell through the earth, into the depths of whatever grave await her beneath the ground, choking on the dirt and stone the deeper she plunged. The ringing was gone, but a new thought took its place. Help. With a blinding flash of light, the fires faded, her breath came back, a freezing sensation seared her blood, and the world disappeared around Annabelle. That's all for now. This is an extremely experimental video, so if you enjoyed it, leave a like. If you have constructive criticisms on how I could improve, leave a comment. If you want more of this, boost my ego with a subscription, or my wallet with a Ko-Fi donation. And whatever you do, have a good day. Cheers, folks.